The true cost of war is rarely tallied in the immediate aftermath of battle, nor is it fully disclosed in the annual budgets of nations. Beneath the public declarations of military spending lies a labyrinthine financial architecture, a sophisticated system of funding mechanisms and accounting practices designed not only to wage conflict, but to obscure its true economic burden from public scrutiny. Throughout history, and with increasing complexity in the modern era, governments have mastered the art of financing military endeavors while simultaneously concealing the profound, multi-generational costs that ripple through economies and societies. This is not merely a question of budget allocation. It is a fundamental challenge to transparency, democratic accountability, and the long-term fiscal health of nations. Today, we delve into the clandestine world of war finance, examining how governments secure the colossal sums required for conflict, from historical precedents of plunder and debt to the intricate financial instruments of the 21st century. We will explore direct methods such as taxation, borrowing, and even the controversial printing of money. Then we will pull back the curtain on the more opaque, indirect strategies: off-budget spending, emergency funds, and the often unacknowledged costs borne by future generations. Our aim is to expose the mechanisms through which the real price of war is systematically hidden, distorting public perception and deferring the inevitable reckoning. To understand the contemporary landscape of war finance, one must first look to its origins. The earliest forms of military funding were straightforward: conquest. Victorious armies plundered vanquished foes, seizing wealth, resources, and even people to sustain their campaigns and enrich their rulers. Empires like Rome relied heavily on tribute from conquered territories and the spoils of war to maintain their vast legions. This direct appropriation of resources served as both a financing mechanism and a reward system, though it was inherently unsustainable as a primary economic model for prolonged conflicts. As societies evolved, so did the methods of funding war. The feudal system saw lords raising armies from their vassals in exchange for land and protection, a decentralized model of military upkeep. With the rise of nation-states and professional armies in the early modern period, rulers began to centralize control over military resources, necessitating more sophisticated financial instruments. Monarchs often turned to private bankers, wealthy merchants, or even religious institutions for loans, pledging future tax revenues or royal assets as collateral. These early loans were typically short-term and high-interest, reflecting the inherent risk of wartime ventures. The Spanish Habsburgs, for instance, famously defaulted multiple times on their debts to European bankers due to the immense costs of their imperial wars. The Napoleonic Wars marked a significant turning point, demonstrating the power of national credit and public finance. Britain, in particular, pioneered the widespread issuance of government bonds to fund its prolonged struggle against France. These bonds, essentially loans from the public to the government, cultivated a sense of national investment in the war effort. Citizens who purchased these bonds became stakeholders, expecting a return on their investment and developing a vested interest in the nation's success. This period also saw the expansion of national debt as a semi-permanent feature of state finance, a stark departure from previous eras in which debt was considered a temporary evil to be repaid swiftly. The First World War elevated war finance to an unprecedented scale. The industrial nature of the conflict demanded immense resources: munitions, food, uniforms, medical supplies far beyond what traditional taxation could provide. Governments across Europe and North America issued war bonds or liberty bonds, aggressively marketing them to their populations through patriotic appeals. In the United States, these bonds were pitched as a civic duty, a way for every citizen to contribute to victory. The sheer level of borrowing during WWI led to an explosion of national debts, creating economic instability and fueling inflation in many combatant nations. Central banks also began playing a more active role by purchasing government bonds, effectively monetizing debt, a practice that injects money into the economy and carries significant inflationary risks. World War II pushed these financial innovations even further. The scale of global mobilization required a complete reorientation of national economies toward war production. Governments implemented rationing, price controls, and wage freezes to manage resources and prevent runaway inflation while simultaneously raising taxes. The Lend-Lease Act, though presented as a foreign aid program, was a monumental financial mechanism that allowed the United States to supply allied nations with war materials, effectively deferring payment and intertwining the economic destinies of the combatants. This era firmly established the concept of the military-industrial complex, where government spending became intrinsically linked to vast networks of private industries, permanently altering the relationship between state, economy, and conflict. From these historical precedents, the modern arsenal of war finance emerged, a complex array of direct and indirect methods designed to fuel conflict. While direct methods are relatively straightforward conceptually, their application reveals layers of strategic financial maneuvering. The most fundamental direct method is taxation. Governments can, and often do, raise taxes during wartime income taxes, corporate taxes, and excise taxes on specific goods. The idea is to fund military expenditures by drawing revenue from the populace and businesses. However, raising taxes significantly during conflict is politically challenging, as it directly impacts disposable income and business profitability. Moreover, tax increases rarely cover the exorbitant demands of modern warfare. Governments often hesitate to impose substantial tax hikes for fear of public backlash, which could undermine support for the war effort. Thus, taxation serves as a foundational but insufficient component of war funding. Far more prevalent is borrowing or debt issuance. Governments sell bonds to investors, citizens, banks, corporations, pension funds, foreign governments, and international institutions. Purchasing a government bond means lending money to the government, which promises repayment with interest. This mechanism allows governments to access massive capital quickly. The perceived safety of government bonds, especially from stable economies, makes them attractive. However, heavy borrowing accumulates national debt, requiring large annual interest payments that divert funds from public services. Moreover, extensive borrowing can crowd out private investment by absorbing available capital. Financing wars through debt pushes the cost onto future generations, who must repay the principal and interest. A more contentious direct method is the printing of money, or monetizing debt. This occurs when a central bank purchases government bonds by creating money electronically. While this provides immediate liquidity without raising taxes or borrowing from the public, it carries a significant risk of inflation. Injecting more money into the economy without an equivalent increase in goods and services drives up prices, eroding purchasing power. Historically, this method has been used in extreme emergencies or when other funding avenues were exhausted, often with devastating consequences such as post-WWI Germany. While modern central banks engage in quantitative easing, they typically justify it as economic stimulus rather than war finance, though the lines can blur during prolonged military spending. Beyond these direct mechanisms lie numerous indirect methods and financial subterfuges that effectively hide the true cost of war. These are the secret funds that keep the public unaware of the full economic burden. Off-budget spending is a prime example. It involves creating special accounts or emergency appropriations that operate outside the normal budgetary process. While regular defense budgets undergo parliamentary or congressional scrutiny, off-budget funds can be allocated with limited oversight, often under the pretext of national security. This allows governments to finance sensitive or controversial operations without direct public accountability, obscuring billions, sometimes trillions of dollars. Closely related are supplemental appropriations. These requests for additional funding, made outside the annual budget cycle, are presented as emergencies but often finance ongoing military operations deliberately, under-budgeted in the main appropriations bill. By treating recurring expenses as emergencies, governments bypass rigorous debate and scrutiny. Emergency funds, typically reserved for disasters or unforeseen crises, can also be redirected to military expenses. Broad definitions of emergency allow governments to funnel money toward conflicts while circumventing normal budgeting. Another indirect method involves foreign aid and military assistance. While presented as diplomatic tools or humanitarian support, these funds can be tied to war finance. Donor countries may provide aid with the understanding that recipients will purchase weapons or military equipment from the donor nation. This indirectly finances the donor country's defense industry and can support proxy conflicts without formally declaring military involvement. Governments also engage in reprioritization of funds from other sectors. During wartime, budgets for social programs, education, infrastructure, research, and environmental protection may be cut or suspended, with resources redirected to the military. This represents a profound opportunity cost. Public services decline while war is funded indirectly. A major and growing area of hidden war finance is reliance on private military contractors. Increasingly, governments outsource logistics, security, intelligence, and even combat support to private companies. While this can provide flexibility, the reality is often inflated costs, opaque contracts, and reduced accountability. Expenses for these contractors are buried in broad defense budgets, making it difficult to determine the actual number of personnel deployed or the total cost. PMCs also allow governments to reduce official troop counts, diminishing public scrutiny. The true cost of war extends beyond direct expenditures captured in budgets. Governments systematically obscure the long-term societal, economic, and human costs. One major hidden cost is the long-term care of veterans. Immediate medical expenses are accounted for, but the lifelong care required for physical injuries, mental health issues like PTSD, rehabilitation, and disability benefits is rarely included in the initial war budget. These expenses span decades and represent massive financial commitments for future taxpayers. Infrastructure damage and reconstruction represent another colossal hidden cost. Rebuilding roads, hospitals, utilities, and public facilities in war-torn regions can require hundreds of billions of dollars. Whether the burden falls on the defeated nation, occupying forces, or international aid, the cost ultimately drains global resources. Opportunity costs represent perhaps the most profound hidden burden. Resources, human, financial, industrial, and intellectual diverted to war could have contributed to scientific innovation, education, healthcare, or infrastructure. What is not built, discovered, or achieved because funds were spent on conflict shapes a nation's long-term development. Inflation and economic distortion also follow war finance. Increased demand for military goods, supply chain disruptions, and money printing push prices higher, acting as a stealth tax. War economies can distort markets and reduce living standards for years. Environmental damage from war-contaminated soil and water, destroyed ecosystems, and massive carbon emissions creates long-term financial and health costs rarely included in war budgets. War also inflicts social costs. Increased inequality, civil liberties erosion, psychological trauma, and social fragmentation. These consequences elevate crime, reduce social cohesion, and degrade quality of life. The revolving door between government and defense contractors coupled with intensive lobbying, perpetuates high military spending. Companies profit enormously from conflicts, often advocating for continued or expanded military engagement. Cost overruns, delayed projects, and unnecessary expenditures are frequently hidden behind national security rhetoric. Finally, future generations bear the debt accumulated to finance wars. Servicing and repaying this debt diverts resources from education, healthcare, energy, and development. Decisions made today restrict the opportunities of tomorrow's citizens. To fully understand secret funds and hidden costs, examining case studies is essential. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars following the September 11th attacks exemplify how governments finance prolonged conflicts while obscuring the true cost. Initially framed as short-term engagements, these wars expanded into multi-decade commitments that reshaped the U.S. financial landscape. A primary mechanism was extensive reliance on supplemental appropriations and off-budget spending. Instead of incorporating war costs into the defense budget, requiring tax increases or cuts to other programs, Congress repeatedly passed emergency supplemental bills with limited debate. These circumvented normal budgeting and allowed massive expenditures without transparency. Early war on terror budgets were modest, but successive supplementals added hundreds of billions of dollars, masking the escalating cost from the public. Another defining feature was the massive use of private contractors. Companies such as Blackwater, now Academy, and many others provided security, logistics, intelligence, and base operations. Outsourcing allowed the government to maintain lower official troop numbers, reducing political risk. However, contractors were costly, lacked oversight, and were frequently paid far more than military personnel. Their expenses were buried within procurement and emergency budgets, making true costs difficult to assess. This shadow workforce became a major, hidden component of total war expenditure. Furthermore, the long-term veteran care costs,